Okay, now
Yeah.
you're on.
Yeah.
You can say.
Hello and welcome to the Muslim Viewpoint, a new podcast series powered by the non-profit national media platform American Muslim Today. I'm your host, Rifat Malik. We are continuing our Get Out the Vote series, and today we are joined by two special guests. Dr. Jill Stein is running as the presidential candidate for the Green Party for the third time after securing her first nomination in 2012 and again in 2016. She's a Harvard-educated physician whose research into the links between toxic exposure and illnesses emerging in the 1990s led to a life of advocacy. Dr. Stein is a well-known progressive candidate who has received several awards for her work on health and environmental issues, including campaigning against environmental racism. She is joined by the Green Party vice presidential candidate, Dr. Butch Ware, who is an associate history professor at the University of California, Santa Barbara, specializing in West Africa, Islamic knowledge, and spirituality, as well as the African diaspora. Dr. Ware converted to Islam in 1997, and his academic focus includes exploring the historical, cultural dimensions of Islam and its impact on African societies. So thank you both for joining us today. We really appreciate it. Dr. Stein, I wanted to start by asking you, how is the campaign going? What is the response that you are getting from voters on the ground in what many believe is one of the most consequential elections of our time? And please do tell us how many places that you're on the ballot as well.
So last question first. We are on the ballot now for approaching 40 states, and we will be on as a write-in for an additional 8 states to be on the ballot basically in all but 2 states. And it's an unfortunate aspect of our current political system that it strives to keep choices off the ballot and to keep voters, corralled with the 2 choices that have not served people well. And your question, how is it going? When this, even before the election began, are you hearing an echo, by the way? I can put in some.
Very much hearing an echo.
Let me put in some earbuds right now, and we'll see if we can nip that in the bud. No.
Yeah, just to let you know, there's no echo on our
there.
side. It must just be.
Oh, is that so?
Yeah.
I see. All right. Well, just for Butch's sake, great? That's better on my end too.
Mm-hmm.
So even before this election began, polls showed that voters were at record numbers of wanting other choices. There's a poll that's done every year by Gallup, and it was at a record high of 63% of voters who say that the 2 choices, the 2 mainstream parties being rammed down our throats, are not okay and are not meeting the needs of the American people, and that other choices are necessary. So even going into this campaign, people really wanted to have other choices. And we are very much seeing that out on the campaign trail because we have record rates of, economic insecurity. We have over 60% of voters now who are living paycheck to paycheck. Half of all Americans are now severely economically stressed, just trying to keep a roof over their heads, with 50% of Americans now paying 30 to 50% of their monthly income just to pay their rent. People are mired in medical debt and student debt and cannot afford their medications, and cannot afford their health care either. And we have a government which is spending half of our congressional budget on endless wars, including the genocidal war on Gaza, while our needs here at home are desperately unmet. So we're seeing this on the campaign trail. After the genocidal war broke out, or I should say it's not a war, after the massacres broke out, that was even more intensive, that the American people are really desperate, are really hungry, not only to end the genocide, to end the endless wars, but also to be spending our tax dollars on the things that the American people need, which have not been delivered by business as usual. So I would say basically things are going very well for our campaign. The American people are very much in a political revolt right now and are really hungry for what we are bringing them. At the same time, we have a political system which specializes in silencing political opposition, and the Democrats in particular hired an army of lawyers early on in the campaign to throw their opponents, like RFK and us, and also Cornel West, off the ballot. They advertised for spies and infiltrators to disrupt our campaigns. And most recently, they seized our public funding to complete our ballot access drives. So the system does not want competition and is pulling out all the stops to prevent it. On the other hand, the American people are really begging for a better way forward that enables us to have an America that works for all of us. Because right now it's only working for very few of us. And not only an America that works for all of us, but also a world that works for all of us. Because if the US empire is setting the world on fire, that is a disaster for everyone, including us here at home.
Can I thank you for that, Dr. Stein? Dr. Ware, can I ask you, what motivated you to join the ticket? What policies of the Green Party resonate with you? And would you say that the Green Party is a natural home for you?
Yeah. What motivated me? What policies? And is it a natural home? And I'm getting a pretty serious echo, so I'll try to lower my volume. So I'll answer that question in this way. I asked Dr. Jill Stein about the foreign policy of the Green Party under her administration, because I knew that she was outspoken against the genocide in Gaza. And I wanted to get a picture of what her overall foreign policy approach would be. And so I said, what is the overall foreign policy approach of you and the Green Party? And she said, it is to dismantle the American empire. And those were some of the hardest words that I ever heard. Like, she came out spitting like an old school MC. That is a serious, heavy, weighty word. And the thing is, I responded back, if we're not careful, someone's going to dismantle it for us, right? If we keep sowing violence, then chickens are going to keep coming home to roost, as Malcolm put it, right? And so what we really need to be doing is to be safely, withdrawing from all of these unnecessary military bases. We've been tormenting Muslims all over the world for 20 years, right? And for 20 years before that, leading up to 9/11. So all of this is to say is, when I heard those words, I said, this person is very, very serious. As for my motivation, I'm a religious person. I'm a person of faith, practicing Muslim. When I never had any interest in doing politics, and I don't think I'm doing politics now, because I don't think the Green Party are politicians. I think the Green Party are public servants. But I wanted to stay away from it, and I would prefer to stay with my books. But I actually had like this conversation with my Lord, and I depicted the day of judgment. It was depicted to me in my heart. And God was asking me a question. Did I ever offer you a weapon that you could use to defend your brothers and sisters in humanity, and you refused it? And if I said no to this incredible offer, then I would have essentially have to say, yeah, I was once offered a weapon. I was once offered a political party that was actually about standing for a ceasefire now, that was giving us an opportunity to write on the tablet of history, and for me as a Muslim, on the Lawh al-Mahfuz, my resistance to this genocide. So I interpreted this very much as an absolutely critical step. And so I had to put my books aside and my students aside and the things that I would like to be doing with my life, and stand shoulder to shoulder with an anti-Zionist Jewish woman who is about business, who is about returning the resources of the American people back to the American people, and stop laundering American tax dollars through foreign wars directly to Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and a couple other corporations. So that is, with respect to foreign policy, how I felt about the platform. With respect to, is it a natural home? I'll give you another Islamic concept. Khilafa, stewardship, right? Stewardship. And this is the basic principle of the Green Party, right? People, planet, peace. Well, what in an Islamic concept is the person of faith supposed to be a steward of, if not these three, right? A steward of the people who holds authority on their behalf, keeps them safe from oppressors, keeps them safe from tyrants, keeps them safe from violence. A steward of the planet, our shared home. In our Islamic conception, the human being is made out of earth and water. So the stewardship of the person and the stewardship of the planet are the stewardship of the same substances. It's of the earth and of the water, because these are on loan from God. He's going to call them all back. Indeed, the earth and everything upon it and all that are in it come back to me. Right? So whether you are an indigenous spiritualist or a practicing Muslim, we believe that these resources are not ours. We're supposed to be taking care of them. And that leads to the last piece of stewardship: people, planet, peace. What I learned about Jill Stein was her efforts of denuclearization, right? The idea that we would actually be able to de-escalate this state of terror that humanity has lived in, with this existential threat of us all being wiped off the face of the earth by a tyrant's itchy trigger finger. So for me, does this align with Islam? Yeah, you bet it does.
Thank you. Dr. Stein, I know you considered I believe you considered other Muslim candidates. Why was it important for you and the Green Party to choose someone from that faith as your running mate at this particular time?
I think we are in a perilous moral moment. The imperative to end genocide is first and foremost. And our campaign really centered around that from the start. In fact, as we were just organizing our campaign, that genocide was getting kicked off. And it was very clear to all of us that this was going to be really the driving force in our campaign, to be a voice. And in fact, that we would be the only voice on the ballot across the country that could truly challenge this genocide. There are other wonderful voices, anti-genocide voices in this race, but none of them have ballot access across this country. And if you're going to challenge empire and genocide, you need to be a full-bore challenge to that this catastrophe. So, we looked at a number of candidates who were closely connected to that genocide, either because they are Arab American or because they are Muslim, and it worked out in such a way that we discovered Butch and were really charmed and excited, and felt like so many things come together around this. For being a Jewish woman, a Muslim Black man, it really brings us together from very different backgrounds in a way that is very synergistic and speaks to a very broad swath of the American public who are hurting, in part because of the genocide, in part because of endless war, in part because this all-consuming militarism creates a war on the American people, on working people, on people of color, and on our democracy. So we felt that between the two of us, we brought together many of the demographics that are in this struggle front and center, and that this would be a really magical dynamic here to help lift up the resistance that is alive and well across this country and is otherwise not represented in this election.
Dr. Ware, what do you say to critics and obviously cynics who say that you're being exploited to curry the favor and to get the votes of millions of disillusioned American Muslims, particularly with regard to the issue that you both mentioned, which is Gaza? Do you feel that this is a form of exploitation, or do you feel that this is the choice that you made and you have your reasons?
So first of all, I've never heard any such accusation. It's certainly a cynical thing, and no one's had the nerve to say such a thing to my face. I'll go with that off the top. No, this is not a cynical pairing, nor is it a marriage of convenience. This is a matter of principles and values. Let me just be clear. My first PhD, or sorry, my PhD advisor and mentor was a Jewish anti-Zionist named Stephen Fireman. And so he taught me all about both the secular and religious traditions of anti-Zionism in Judaism. So when Jill Stein presents the way that she presents, that's not new to me. I've been understanding people like Jill Stein and their principled commitment to fighting against Zionism for my whole adult life. JVP, I didn't just learn about Jewish Voice for Peace, in the past, 10 months. Like, this is something that I've been conditioned on from the beginning. So absolutely not, without any question. And moreover, as a child of a teenage mother, I moved from Washington, D.C. to Minneapolis when I was a young boy. And there I became best friends with a young man named Sean Young. I was coming from the inner city in DC. He was half indigenous and coming from a hippie commune in southern Minnesota. And we ended up on the south side of Minneapolis in a neighborhood that was probably about 40% Black, about 10% Native, and the rest were working class white folks and a few Latinos and Asians. And he became my best friend. And it turns out that he was also single parent household. Well, his mom, her name was Annie Young. God rest her soul. Her ashes are now along the Mississippi River in Minneapolis, because she was the first Green Party elected official in the state of Minnesota in the 1980s. And she served for almost 3 decades. So I learned about the values of stewardship in the Green Party literally as a child from my backup mother. And then, to bring things full circle, when we met at the convention, Jill Stein and I, for the first time together, we realized that when Jill Stein joined the Green Party, Annie Young was one of the people that mentored her. So this is not an accident, right? This is a cosmic drama that was written before any of us got here. We are here at just the right time to stand shoulder to shoulder, right? And as I said in a joke the other night, right? Um, a white Jewish doctor and a Black Muslim professor walk into a White House. It's the setup to a joke. Well, write the punchline for us. Tell us how this one ends, because it really is in your hands, right? It really is in your hands. We have an opportunity here to do absolutely incredible things. And I believe fully in Jill Stein. And I know that Jill Stein believes fully in me. And we are going to show you what we are capable of as a tandem.
Dr. Stein, back in April, you were arrested at a pro-Palestinian student protest, and I'm sure you remember that. It was Washington University in Missouri. What is the Green Party's official policy on Palestinians' right to self-determination?
Starting in, I think, 2006, the Green Party adopted a position in favor of full Palestinian sovereignty and self-determination, an end to the occupation, the ethnic cleansing, an end to the apartheid government of Israel. So that is, where the party has stood for a long time. This is not a position that was just adopted in the face of the current crisis. And this was a position actually articulated by my campaign going back in 2012, as well as in 2016.
Do you have a position on a 2-state or a 1-state solution?
Yes. I share the view that we need one standard of democracy, security, dignity, full citizenship for all people in the region. We want to proceed towards a 1-state solution. At the same time, at the moment, we right now have approval by 75% of nations in the UN who already respect Palestinian sovereignty in the way that it is recognized by the UN, which is at the pre-67 borders, which would be the two-state solution. So we basically have the legal infrastructure, the international law, which is ready to go for the two-state solution if the US weren't blocking it, the US and Israel. So it seems to me like we don't want to stand in the way of Palestinian sovereignty at the 67 borders. And that's where we want to start while we proceed towards a single state solution with democracy and security guaranteed for all.
Dr. Ware, your position, I assume, is the same.
Yeah, so one of the first things I did, sorry, I'm getting a little bit of an echo, so I'm gonna try to fix that here. One of the very first things that I did was I got, well, two things. So I called, when this offer was made, all of the Palestinian activists that are at the forefront of struggling against this. And I asked two things. What do you think of Jill Stein's position? And would it be an offense to the Palestinian community for me to accept this, since it had been circulated that perhaps a Palestinian might be offered this position? All of the people that I contacted said, we're the ones that gave Jill your name. So that's the first thing. And I was like, oh, thanks. So it's your fault that I'm in this mess. But quite seriously, like, beyond this, what I did after that was that I took a group of people who I knew had the most thoroughgoing, completely emancipatory agenda regarding Palestinian liberation. And one is, a committed activist. Another one is an international law specialist. Okay. And I had them both separately read the platform. Just read it. Give me line item edits. I mean, I'm good at editing. I do things in systematic ways. There's thousands of footnotes in my respective books. So, I mean, I do my homework, right? So what came back from the radical activist team was essentially 4 words that they would change to make this the cutting edge of liberation for Palestine. And when I cross-referenced those against the legal team, it said that 3 of those 4 words were that because of a technical legal definition, if you change those words, then you would have a US president arguing for something that's illegal in the context of international law. In other words, the Green Party platform is right at the cutting edge of liberation. And time again, when it comes to electoral politics, right? Abolish the Electoral College, ranked choice elections, with respect to the environment and ecological care, line by line, point by point. This is a platform that is actually thought out. And the reason is that we have to think about policy. We don't have billions of dollars to just waste on campaigns and to drown people out. We have to think carefully about how to solve problems. And that's what public stewards do. So yes, absolutely, we see eye to eye on the positions of Palestinian liberation, and that's not just because of vibes. That's because these are well thought out policies that the Green Party has put together and that Jill Stein has shepherded for a generation now, and that. As somebody who's been visibly at the edge of Palestinian liberation, I organized a march and a freedom concert on October 21st. Okay, 2 weeks after the genocide began, when people were still quiet and still scared, and the Zionists came for my job, and I stood 10 toes down, and I'm standing 10 toes down with my sister now, because we absolutely have a compatible vision, a single vision about Palestinian liberation from the Mediterranean to the Jordan.
I'm sure you both saw coverage of the recent DNC convention in Chicago.
Lord.
Where they hosted a side forum with Palestinian representatives, which many would argue is a historic concession by the party. I don't think they've ever had anything like that in the past. However, despite quite desperate pleas and tense, prolonged negotiations, and we were all hearing, like a minute by minute account of the back and forth, they did refuse to allow a Palestinian American delegate to address the full televised convention, while at the same time giving that opportunity to an Israeli couple whose son was being held hostage. What factors do you believe played into this clear double standard, Jill?
Well, this certainly represents where the Democratic Party stands. They take a lot of APAC money. They very much rely on their donations from the war profiteers, from the weapons contractors, you know, and that applies across the board. This is a party run by big money. And when you accept those big contributions, then you will have the best democracy money can buy, which is no democracy at all. And this is why we have a crisis really in virtually every dimension of public policy, because it's not only a problem of the Democrats, it's also a problem of the Republicans. And this is where the Green Party is different. We are a small donor party. We do not have the big loopholes that enable a single donor to write $1 million check. We do not work with super PACs. We do not accept corporate PAC money. So we are a party of, by, and for the people, which is why we can stand on behalf of human rights and international law and ending the genocide and dismantling empire and joining the world community as an adult in a multipolar world, which is the nature of our world today. And that's what a peaceful future requires. This is why we have three potentially nuclear conflicts that are brewing right now around the world, because we are an empire that is still run by the big money of, by, and for Wall Street and the war machine. So this has everything to do with what we are struggling with. So very much, the Democratic Party represents that mindset. That's why this is not something that's going to solve itself. This is why this is not just a little incidental genocide. This genocide is really a microcosm of what is wrong with empire. It's going to be very hard to solve this genocide without actually coming into compliance with international law and the rulings of the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court. They've been very clear about what needs to happen here to solve this genocide and to solve this larger crisis. That is why ending the genocide is step one. Ending the ethnic cleansing, the occupation, and the apartheid is step two. This is a long struggle, and the Democratic Party, like the Republican Party, you have two genocidal options right now, and we should not be talked into destroying our own humanity, destroying international law, destroying human rights. We need to stand up for what is right here. That's how we solve the problem now. That's also how we have a future that we can all survive in.
I just wanted to touch on a couple of other policy issues. Professor Ware, what is the Green Party's position on gun reform? Our platform at American Muslim Today, we're based here in Texas, where we have permitless concealed carry. As part of the anti-war movement, how far would you go in tackling the issue of mass shootings and gun violence, which is clearly rampant in the U.S. right now?
Yeah. So this is also one of the pieces of the party platform that has been attractive to me and has resonated deeply with my own life of scholarship and of activism. So I'm going to have to provide a little bit of context, but one of the leading figures that I've written about in my academic work is a person called Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba. He is a Senegalese scholar born 1855, deceased 1927, and modern academics have been able to catalog no less than 200 books written by this scholar. Some of them collections of as many as 200 poems praising the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and some of those poems containing as many as 5,000 lines of verse. Now, what Bamba is most known for is his nonviolent resistance to Islam, to Western imperialism during the colonial period. His movement, the Tariqa Muridiyya, had a completely pacifist philosophy that allowed them to survive periods of imperial occupation and to grow their movement nonetheless. He is, I would say that he's a West African Martin Luther King, except Martin Luther King did not write 200 books in the Arabic language. Okay, so Bamba is a personal hero of mine, just as much as Malcolm is a personal hero of mine. And I actually published in something called the Journal of Peace Studies in Islam, a piece called traditions of tolerance and principles of pacifism in Islamic thought. And you guys are in Texas. I'm lobbying to get invited to deliver a lecture at ISNA this coming weekend. I know that you guys can't do political parties at political events at ISNA, so allow me to come in and present my academic work on traditions of tolerance and principles of pacifism. I believe nonetheless in the right of self-defense, right? That people have the right to defend themselves and to defend their homes. And I have not, I should confess, Imam Malik said that half of knowledge is knowing when to say la adri. I do not know. I do not know the ins and outs of the gun policy of the Green Party. I was too busy working on carceral state reform, foreign policy, and reparations, which I very much hope to talk about. But I have no doubt that with the goodwill and the focus on tolerance and pacifism in my own work, that we see eye to eye, because quite literally, people, planet, and peace. That's what the West African Islam that I have studied and written about throughout my adult life. That's really what it's all about. They have offered resistance to white supremacy and imperialism that are rooted in very similar principles to those that animate the Green Party.
Okay, well, just as a footnote, I know people from ISNA are listening to this broadcast, so if they get the message,
holler at your boy. Holler at your boy.
Okay, they heard the message anyway, loud and clear. Dr. Stein, I wanted to ask you about immigration. A federal judge in Texas on Monday temporarily blocked the Biden administration from granting legal status to unauthorized immigrants married to American citizens. This followed a challenge by, I believe, 16 Republican-led states. Do we have porous borders? Is there an immigration crisis in this country? And if so, what is the Green Party's solution?
There absolutely is an immigration crisis. And let me say that the most important thing that we can do to solve that crisis is to stop causing it in the first place, because so many U.S. policies are actually driving people to have to leave their homes to try to find safety. And that includes the many regime change operations. It includes corporate exploitation, like, for example, in Guatemala back in the 1950s, when the U.S. overturned the democratically elected government in Guatemala in order to protect United Fruit Corporation from land redistribution, which was a policy adopted by the Democratic government, which basically initiated generations of chaos and civil war in Guatemala. And this story gets told over and over again. You can look at Haiti, where the U.S. overthrew the democratically elected social government of Aristide, not once, but twice. And, that's been part of a very long line of interference and destabilization in Haiti. So there's that economic destabilization. The drug wars conducted by the U.S. and largely financed by the U.S. has also been extremely destabilizing and has fostered these flourishing cartels, which basically rule by violence and create havoc. That can be solved by, for example, decriminalizing drugs, especially here in this country. And let me add that it's not migrants who bring drugs to this country. It's red-blooded Americans who bring drugs to this country not through porous borders, but through the legitimate portals of entry. And then climate change is also another driver of mass migrations. And so many millions of farmers have been put out of work basically by drought and who come fleeing to the US. So there's so much that we can do. Some of it requires some turnaround time, but ending the political interference and regime change and endless wars, we can do that right now and mitigate the migrant crisis on that basis, also on account of the drug war. So there's stuff we can do right now. Second thing we have to do, instead of funding a border wall, which is ineffective and which kills people, also kills wildlife and kills ecosystems. Instead, we put those billions into the human infrastructure so that people can be rapidly background checked and provided papers so that they can go to work. Because when migrants are allowed to work, they do much more than pay their own way. They actually create prosperous economies. And it's estimated that in the next 10 years, that migrants will expand the economy by $7 trillion. So we do not need to have a migrant crisis. We need to stop causing it, massively decompress the numbers of people who are being forced to flee, and then we treat people with dignity and respect who have been forced to come here seeking asylum, and we basically process them quickly so they can be full members of society who are contributing to our economies and making us a safer, more prosperous, diverse community for the long haul.
I've just got a couple of questions left, and I just wanted to get back to the election, the electoral process. Dr. Stein, you've been accused of, well, both of you obviously, of boosting Trump's chances of winning. That's the accusation that you actually faced back in 2016 when Trump ran for the first time. The argument is that if more voters in states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin had voted for Hillary Clinton instead of you or the other main independent candidate, which I believe was Gary Johnson, Clinton would have won the Electoral College, even though we do know she won the national popular vote. Are you at all concerned, both of you, that this is exactly what is going to happen in the upcoming November election?
So, if I may, I'd like to critique that propaganda, because that propaganda
Tell them.
says it says that I was taking votes away from Hillary Clinton, when in fact exit polls are very clear. People who voted green otherwise would not have come out to vote. These aren't stolen from a Democrat. There's a myth here that somebody owns your vote. It's a Democrat or a Republican and they own your vote. No, actually, we, the voters in a democracy, we own our votes, and those votes have to be earned. They don't belong to anybody. No one is entitled. And if they tell you that they are entitled to your vote, they do not deserve even consideration of your vote. So the whole premise here is false. And actually, the mathematics of it is false. What we do is bring people out who otherwise aren't going to vote. And that's not a small number. Potentially, that is a huge number that could win an election in a three-way race. In 2020, 1 out of every 3 voters stayed home in this country. And those voters tend to be younger, of color, and lower income. Exactly the people to whom our agenda speaks, because we talk about an economic bill of rights, the right to a job, a living wage, a $25 an hour wage that actually keeps a family above poverty, healthcare as a human right, and so on. So they present this very distorted analysis. Why? Because they're terrified that the public should discover that there actually is a party and a political campaign that can meet their needs, that instead of squandering trillions of dollars murdering people around the world, instead we can actually have the things that we need right here at home. We'll all be the safer for it, the healthier and the happier for it. This is actually doable. That's why they have to silence this and disparage us and accuse us of being spoilers. They spoiled it for themselves by abandoning their base. They did this especially, in the 2008 Wall Street crash, where Obama and 2 Democratic houses of Congress, it was the Democratic trifecta, they bailed out the banks to the tune of trillions, and they threw out homeowners to the tune of 7-8 million of them. So people were not happy when it came to the 2010 midterms, and the Democrats lost 1,000 seats in state legislatures. They lost 64 seats in Congress. They lost 12, 13 seats in the Senate, and the same number of governorships. So the problem here was not third parties. Democrats try to blame their loss on third parties. It had nothing to do with third parties. It's because people are tired of being thrown under the bus by a political party that is
Can I
bought
just
and paid for by Wall Street and the Wall
Well,
Street.
can I be tagged in by my partner on this one just for a quick point on
you
this?
can, but I was going to ask you to a counter question, and you can answer that as well, which is that I take your
Well,
point, Dr. Stein, and I was wondering, Professor Ware, if you could also answer. The counter to that would be this election is different because for the first time you have many Muslims and progressives who would have voted Democrat, but because of the government's policy and complicity in Gaza, they are looking for another option. And thereby the argument would stand that you would be splitting the anti-Trump, anti-Republican vote.
Incorrect. So we actually have data on this. So let me start in this way. And I'm going to get to the data from the ISPU, the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, which will debunk that. But since this is American Muslim Today, I'm going to start with a Quran verse, right? So God says in the Quran, "Is there any sound worse than the braying of a jackass?" How does the Democratic Party represent itself? With a donkey, correct? So this is just jackasses braying. This is plainly not factual for the following reasons. ISPU research showed that in 2020, Joe Biden received 65% of the Muslim vote in the swing states of Georgia, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, all of which have very similar demographics: large African American communities, large Muslim communities, significant numbers of working class whites. In January of 2024, that number went from 65% to 12%. The bottom fell out. Arabs and Muslims are never going to vote for the party that committed this genocide. And in fact, Kamala Harris coming onto the ticket did not even get that number back up to 20% amongst Muslims. So we are not keeping anybody away. We are giving people a real, live, viable option. Only 5% of those voters are going to Trump. So this is pure fiction and propaganda. 80% of those voters are going towards third-party candidates, and we are the third party that has the most electoral reach. So I ask you, who is really throwing their vote away? Right? We have the possibility to not just give in to the Democrats and knuckle under. Listen, the Democrats are not winning any of those states. They couldn't win them without the Muslim vote in 2020, and they are not going to get it no matter what circumstances happen, because Muslims are not going to vote for people that are genociding the Palestinians and destroying the Holy Land. They have lost Muslim voters, and they are not getting them back. So then the question is, with that loss, what are you going to do? Are you going to build something new? Because I believe that we are going to turn Michigan emerald green. I believe we're going to turn Pennsylvania emerald green. And I'm going to tell you why and how. Because in the next election, our team has determined that it'll take roughly 2.5 million votes likely if you split three ways in the state of Pennsylvania. There are 1.3 million Muslims in the state of Pennsylvania. All it takes is aggressive voter registration. And just think about how we are reaching the younger generation on TikTok, on Instagram. They did not ban TikTok fast enough. All we need to do is use the same kind of data analysis tools for voter registration to help reach registration into the hands of young people that are used to help fundraising and to help people go viral, right? You use data analysis to get lookalike populations, and then that shows you who your target demographic is. We can absolutely, exponentially raise the number of registered voters in that 18 to 29 category, because this is a generation that's on fire. There's the last thing I'm gonna say about this. I have been teaching on North American university campuses in universities for 20 years. When I was talking about a free Palestine and anti-imperialism and anti-capitalism 20 years ago, they looked at me like I was crazy. Not this generation. They are built different. And if all we have to do is get the vote out and watch, we turn one of those three states, Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, green. What happens when somebody wins a primary, right? All of a sudden, they become the favorite. What happens when we turn one of those states in the polling? All of a sudden, we go running out. What happens when they let Dr. Jill Stein up on stage in a presidential election to embarrass those two clowns from Team Blue and Team Red? What happens when they let Professor Butch Ware up on stage with J.D. Vance and Tim Walz? I'm telling you, this is American Muslim Today. Just like Muhammad Ali, we're going to shock the world.
Just one final counter to that. Again, Democratic supporting critics would say, after experiencing the first Trump presidency, knowing what we do now about what he is capable of, obviously we didn't know before 2016, and what we have learnt since, things like the Conservative Project 2025 agenda, which clearly would attack fundamental human rights, including women's health care, immigration, LGBTQ rights, racial equality, educational freedoms. Would you accept that there is a moral imperative, in a way that there has never been before, for liberals to unite against a possible second Trump presidency?
Who's the question for? Yeah, Jill, please, by all means.
I'll take the first stab. You're welcome to follow up.
No, you can knock them out with just one punch on this one, so go right ahead.
So let me say that this is the prevailing propaganda. In every election, it's always been the most important, most desperate election ever. Reason, to unify behind the Democratic Party, according to their propaganda. But it's really important to examine that skeptically. First of all, the Agenda 2025 has been around for a very long time on the issue of women's reproductive rights. That was supposed to have been codified by Barack Obama, decades ago. And after promising that it would be the first thing he would do, it was not the first thing that he did. And also remember that we achieved Roe v. Wade under Richard Nixon with a very conservative court. So by standing up and demanding it, we can achieve women's reproductive rights. And also this can likewise still be codified in Congress, and that's a longer story, but that can be done. It's the determination that we are going to do it, which is critical, and that's been absolutely missing in action from the Democrats. And let me say that to talk about Trump being some terrible threat, while we right now have a president who is conducting genocide, who is slaughtering women and children before our very eyes, I think it just does not hold water. Many people, and I would argue lower income and people of color, I've heard from many people that under Trump, life wasn't so bad. Yes, there was the Muslim ban, which people had to mobilize against, but they did. And in addition, that Trump was providing actually a moratorium on evictions, payments during COVID, the child tax deduction, that there were many things that Trump actually did that wasn't so bad, that life was actually livable under Trump, and not necessarily better or worse under Biden. And that this dramatic difference that the Democratic partisans tell you about was not clearly so much in evidence. And I have to say also, when you're being beaten over the head for simply peacefully expressing your opposition to genocide, when you are a student on campus or you are standing with a student on campus, and you are then attacked by police who have been trained by the Israeli occupation forces, which is now going on all across the country. This is actually very common that police forces are being trained by the IDF. And we have now these cop cities. We've heard about Cop City in Atlanta under a Democratic city council, much against the public will, which is very much against it. And the Democrats are even trying to suppress a referendum to shut it down. So, the Democrats, are proliferating this police violence. We're now looking at some 70 or 80 cop cities being built around the country. The draft has been brought back. Registration for that draft is automatic. The Democrats have been leading the charge. They used to be the peace party. They're now the war party. The Republicans are also the war party, but the Democrats have been leading the charge on several fronts. So it may be very comforting to think that somehow the Democrats are going to protect us. But in fact, the Democratic agenda has been pushing the whole political system to the right. And what is the Democratic agenda? It's the neoliberal agenda of austerity, of privatization, of major tax breaks for the wealthy, and endless war. This has been a disaster, not only in this country, but around the world. Has created incredible insecurity and despair among working people and has really pushed them into the arms of the right wing. And the answer to that is what happened in France. This is how France was able to beat back the right wing, which is by a true left agenda that actually addresses people's material needs. That does not happen under the Democratic Party. Under the Democratic Party, you get lip service, but you don't actually get answers, whether you're looking for desperate healthcare needs or freedom from student debt and medical debt. The climate crisis, which has not been resolved in the least. In fact, under Democratic presidents, we've seen fossil fuel emissions skyrocket, in fact, where the US has taken the lead now in producing fossil fuels around the world. So the Democrats are not the solution to right-wing extremism. In many ways, they have been the cause of right-wing extremism. So there's no comfort here that they are going to solve the problem. We, the people, need to solve the problem with a truly people-powered agenda.
I want to ask you a final question, and then if we have time, there are some questions I think coming in from the audiences online. So if you have time, we could answer them. My final question to both of you is hypothetical. Right now, the race is neck and neck between Harris and Trump. Should the Democratic candidate win, she would, of course, make history as the first female and the first African-American woman of South Asian descent to hold the office. Dr. Stein, as a female candidate, you will appreciate some of the vile, misogynistic attacks that she's faced and is continuing to face. Would you welcome on any level that this is a historic, it would be a historic outcome against gender bias and patriarchy?
This was the feeling when Barack Obama was elected, that this was truly historic. But what did we get? We got the Wall Street bailouts. We went from 2 wars to 7 wars. Guantanamo was going to be closed down. It was not at all. Healthcare was going to be a public option, but oops, that didn't happen either. Healthcare was increasingly privatized. So I don't think identity politics is the solution to what ails us. Unfortunately, it has been very much the propaganda campaign that's been used to try to push forward a corporate agenda, a warmongering agenda. To listen to what Kamala Harris was calling for, the most lethal U.S. fighting force ever. This is not what we need. This is not what we need whatsoever. We need to stand up and not be blinded by identity politics that's being used to try to lure us down a corporate path. We don't have time for that. The world cannot afford that. We are on the verge of nuclear war on several fronts right now. The economy cannot afford it. Working people are in very tough straits right now. Our healthcare system is in very rough shape. We cannot beat around the bush here. We actually need to solve these problems, and that's not going to happen from either the Democratic candidate or the Republican candidate.
Final word to you on that, Professor Ware, as an African American who teaches about the struggles of Black Americans and that they faced for centuries. Would you recognize her achievement in that context in any way, should she win? I'm not sure. Are you on silent? Did you press on?
While he's collecting his thoughts, let me just say that it would be equally historic for a Jewish woman to win this race and to actually bring peace and an end to genocide in the process. And that should not be diminished.
Absolutely.
If the 1 out of every 3 voters who's not voting, because they don't approve of these corporate candidates, if word got out and they actually came out and voted, we could see this election turned on its head.
Okay. I don't know why I can't hear you. Is there something going on at our end?
I am not hearing Bush either.
Yeah, Professor Ware, I think it's something you may have accidentally.
How about now?
Oh,
Now,
now
okay, now we
perfect.
hear
Yeah.
you. But
Sorry, I think it's just that my earbuds actually ran out of power. So, and also I froze. But I still think I heard the question. So you're asking about this historic achievement. Is that correct?
Yeah,
the
if you were
first,
to
the
win.
first woman and
Yeah. Okay. So
Black
let me
Asian.
just let me be blunt about this. Okay. Um, it is an absolutely odious affront to the entire history of Black liberation to have this blackface minstrel show imperialism that is being run out of the White House right now. That Black identity be weaponized to justify the incineration of Palestinians, a betrayal of everything bombing. Tory stand for, Malcolm X stood for. This is heresy according to the very definitions of blackness itself. So her cosplay performances of blackness, where she pretends to be a part of the culture, she is playing in our faces, she is playing in our culture. And I'm going to say this woman is to politics what Drake is to hip hop. Okay, you guys heard what Kendrick had to say. Kendrick said, "You come through Atlanta when you need dollars. You ain't a colleague. Use a colonizer." And that's all this is. This is blackface as no girl magic. You're gonna make me co-sign for a genocide. You people should be ashamed of yourselves for even considering this to be in any way a representative of the Black tradition. It is as though the people are under some kind of spell because they've been lulled to sleep by these media companies that treat it like it's a football game, my team versus your team, identity politics, and so forth. Wake up. These people are murderers. This is not real what they are showing you. This is one party, purple fascists, controlled by the 1%, overlapping networks of political patronage. Some are just in one corner, some are just in other. But AIPAC and the war machine owns both of these parties. Vote green, get free. Go green for Palestine.
Okay, thank you. I'm just gonna. Do we have a few minutes? I'm just gonna ask you a couple of questions.
I actually begging your pardon. We have an event here in DC that I need to physically get to.
Okay,
So
okay.
I actually
Dr. Stein,
begging your pardon, and also to my running mate. But if hopefully I'm not sure what the situation is, but I actually do have.
Go ahead, Butch. I'll hold the fort for you as best as I
Thank
can.
you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you for
Appreciate you.
joining us today,
Okay,
Professor
and
Ware.
thank
We
you for the
really
wonderful
appreciate it.
invitation.
See
Thank
you.
you so much.
Okay, okay. Yeah,
Great.
Dr. Stein, there's someone's asking, how does Dr. Stein feel about the Ukrainian incursion into the Kursk region of Russia? Does she support Ukraine's right to defend itself and the US's interest in supporting their defense?
This whole war is very unfortunate. It's most unfortunate for the people of Ukraine who are paying to the hilt, who have suffered. The numbers are unclear, but it's many experts say it's hundreds of thousands of casualties. Some of them are deaths, and some of them are serious injuries. The U.S. has basically stated that this is its effort to bleed Russia with Ukrainian bodies, essentially. This all could have been avoided simply by guaranteeing neutrality for Ukraine. And, in the same way that Austria became neutral after the Second World War, that could have been arranged. Russia signed on to that before the war. After the war began, Russia also signed on to a peace accord negotiated under Turkey. So this is a very solvable problem. It's absolutely tragic. And it is now escalating rather quickly. It's off the headlines because we've been very focused on the party, the fiddling while Rome burns, basically going on at the DNC. But there's a huge escalation going on right now where Russia, from their point of view, they see the U.S. as conducting this incursion into Russia. So this gets to be extremely dangerous very quickly. This could readily go nuclear. It's very important that cooler heads prevail and that we down and we negotiate an end to this immediately.
What is Akif Salim is asking? What is the Green Party's policy regarding Afghanistan? Do you recognize the Taliban government?
You know, that's a really interesting question. I'm not sure that we recognize the Taliban government. I'm not aware that we do. But what we do recognize is that Afghanistan has been made a complete mess of, and that 20 years of war basically killed a lot of people, destroyed the economy, and basically wound us up exactly where we were to start with. So this is a good example, I think, of where U.S. imperial positions are not making the world a safer and more stable place. This is a good example of where we need international law and diplomacy, and not to have been fighting a war here that cost, some trillions of dollars on the part of the U.S. And has been horrible for the people of Afghanistan and for the U.S. and NATO forces as well, who've been fighting this war. So this has been a disaster all around. And unfortunately, there's not a soundbite, I think, about how we quickly fix it. But I think it's definitely not by sending in the troops and trying to strong our way to a U.S. Favorable government.
I wanted to ask you just a final question, Dr. Stein. As a Jewish woman, have you received, reprisals or pushback because of your support for Palestinians? I'm sure you have, but has it been on a different scale during this current crisis compared to previous years when there have been, when this issue has reared? Does it feel different now than before? And what would you put that down to?
I think there's much more awareness right now of what the nature of the Israeli occupation, which has been absolutely murderous. And it didn't just start on October 7th, that this was the nature really of the ethnic cleansing that was built into the plan, starting with the Zionist occupation. And the very religious Jewish rabbis say that that Zionism is anti-Jewish because it violates basic Jewish tenets of thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not kill. They and others will be the first to tell you that this is not a religious conflict, that Muslims, Jews, and Christians all live together in peace for millennia in Jerusalem. That all changed when the Zionists came and basically drove them all out. I think awareness about this is much greater than it was prior to this genocidal war and the massacres. And the war and the massacres have been so in front of our faces on everyone's computer screens and social media. It's been a real wake-up moment for, I think, American Jews and everyone, Americans and people all around the world. So many people are really holding Israel now to a different standard than what it was held. And they're not buying the Israeli propaganda that used to say that, greatest democracy in the world. No, hardly. There were massacres that began from, the moment the Zionists arrived. And because this does not in any way contradict the horrible history of the Jews having undergone genocide, and the history of anti-Semitism, which is why, I'm involved in this to start with, because I grew up just after the Holocaust as in a Jewish community, attending a Jewish synagogue. And in that culture, coming to terms with genocide was a very critical thing for me as a little girl. And for me, coming to terms with that had everything to do with resolving that genocide would not happen again. We did not just hold the Nazis accountable for the genocide. We held the bystanders accountable for the genocide. And I feel like, okay, that's how I made my peace with the world. I need to live up to that now because there's a genocide going on for all the world to see. You have to really close your eyes not to see it. That is happening right now in a way which is absolutely intolerable and unbearable. And I feel very much a responsibility to stand up and to make this genocide end. And I feel like so many people are having that realization right now across all faiths, non-faiths, etc. People all across the world have really come into harmony on this view right now. It's only Israel and the U.S. government, not the U.S. people. The U.S. people oppose this genocide. If we had a government that actually was serving us, we the people, that was not serving the war contractors and AIPAC, it would be with the program. It would not have invited this war criminal, Netanyahu, to come and address the House of Congress and give him a standing ovation every minute while over the 60 minutes of his speech. You know, it's outrageous that our government has departed from the values and the vision of the American people. And, you know, I'm confident that if we stand up and we give people a vote, if our race is not in this, if our election, if my campaign is not in this, people do not have a nationwide choice against genocide. And if we do not vote against genocide, we are owning genocide. We are endorsing genocide and we are enabling genocide. I think it is the moral imperative of the moment right now that we stand up with our responsibility to democracy and we instruct our elected officials, no, we are not going to sell our souls here for a genocide. We are standing up, we oppose this genocide, and we demand that our leaders also do that. And even if we don't win this election, every vote that is cast against genocide is a shot across the bow of this genocidal empire that we the people will not stand for, this cold-blooded murder of women and children, this torture of 2 million people, this normalization of genocide and the violation of international law and human rights. We are not going to stand for it. We're standing up, we're getting organized, we are getting stronger by the day, and we are going to bring this to an end. Every vote that's cast will help push who's ever in the White House, whether it's us, whether it's Harris, whether it's Trump, they will be pushed by every vote that is cast against genocide right here and now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stein. Really appreciate your outreach to our audience, to the Muslim community. And of course, thank you to Professor Ware as well for joining us today. We will see everyone next week as we continue our special series exploring the issues that matter to you ahead of the 2024 November presidential elections. Goodbye for now, and please join us again.